Good afternoon, and thank you to QED for having invited me again to this, which seems to have interestingly become a benchmark stay tuned yearly event. Um, uh, Thank you to Steve for having qualified me as ESMA, but unfortunately I'm not. I'm just coordinating the task force in charge of drafting the technical advice, which you all know we delivered to the Commission last November, and to draft the regulatory and implementing technical standard. As I have the privilege to speak the first today, let me just give you some background information about the three key areas of the regulation. On the left-hand side, the activity of provision of benchmarks, which became a regulated activity after 30 June 2016, when the regulation entered into force. The majority of provisions in this area are addressed to administrators. Then there is the activity of contribution of input data for the determination of a benchmark, and the provisions in this area are addressed to contributors, whether they are supervised entities or not, and these are bound to adhere to a code of conduct setting the peculiarities of the contribution process, which is the responsibility of the administrator to draft. And then the regulation intervene also in the area of the usage of a benchmark, because after the entry into application from 1st January 2018, supervised entities in the European space will be bound by using only benchmarks provided by administrators within the ESMA register, or third country benchmarks having entailed one of the three processes envisaged in the regulation: equivalence, recognition, or endorsement. These are the 5 areas in which the Commission asked the ESMA technical advice, but let's see these in more detail. Starting with the definition, you probably all know that the first mandate was already in the level 1, and it was concerned with better defining when a figure might be deemed to be made available to the public. The technical advice basically points to 2 important elements. The first, that the transmission should reach out one or more entities separate of the provider. And the second element is that the transmission should reach out a potentially indeterminate number of recipients. Additionally, the technical advice suggests that a final investor having invested in a product referencing to a benchmark has access through indirect to the value of the benchmark. The second definition, in which instead was the faculty of the Commission to ask the technical advice of ESMA, is the further elaboration of one element within the definition of provision of a benchmark, which is the administering the arrangement for the determination of a benchmark. In this area, the technical advice points essentially emphasizes the relevance of setting, adapting, and maintaining the methodology over the time as a key characteristics of the activity of provision. We also consider that this definition has to be read in conjunction with the definition of administrator, which was the control over the activity of provision. Such constructions allow to encompass all different business models of which we became aware of by the industry, including where the intellectual property of the methodology is owned by somebody different that was in charge of the control over the methodology. And finally, ESMA was required to further define what issuance of a financial instrument means. In this area, we didn't find any relevant precedent as regard issuance, as opposed to the concept of issuer, which is instead used in other pieces of legislation. And for this reason, we essentially elaborated this definition leveraging on the common market practice. We are aware that derivatives are not encompassed by this definition, the way it has been elaborated by ESMA, but we didn't consider this as anyhow problematic because the derivatives will still be in scope, as if a derivative contract references a benchmark, the payout of that contract is determined with reference to that benchmark, and that amounts to use in the meaning of the regulation. Another area of the technical advice is the measurement of the reference value of a benchmark for the purpose of determining whether a benchmark is critical, significant, or no significant. The major difficulty in this area was to think of any available and reliable source of data without necessarily increasing the burden on supervised entities via additional reporting or disclosure requirements. And precisely for this reason, the technical advice in the end make reference to the MiFIR reference data, to the EMIR requirements for trade repositories, and to the duty to publish the net asset value, which is present in both the UCIT and AFM directives. We also decided to introduce a fallback regime, according to which it is possible to use as an alternative to regulated sources of data other sources of information, like for instance the open interest, which is usually calculated by a trading venue or a CCP for a market of derivatives, in case this reference to in general, but it is an information that might be used if the derivatives make reference to a benchmark. And finally, the technical advice indicate how to calculate the reference value in case a benchmark is referenced within a combination. Then there are the qualitative criteria for singling out critical benchmarks, faster critical benchmarks than those above the 500 billion threshold. But in order to understand the relevance of this part of the technical advice, let me just recall that the qualitative criteria in the level 1 are due to be used in two distinct processes. A top-down one, which is still in the responsibility of the Commission to single out critical benchmarks whose reference value is between 400 and 500 billion euro. And another one, which is a bottom-up process, in which instead it's up to the competent authorities of the member state where the benchmark is used and the competent authority of establishment of the administrator to prompt the adoption of an implementing act by the Commission, including a particular benchmark into the list of the critical. In this area, we were not due to define which these qualitative criteria are, because these are already dictated in level 1. We just further elaborated on each of them by defining for each of them a different metric, which has been dealt with not in absolute terms, but following a relative impact approach, so as to cater for the different economic context in the different member states. We also explicitly recognize that not all the criteria are appropriate or are going to be used, or there will be available data for them to be used for each of the benchmarks to be examined. In the area of the endorsement, ESMA was mandated to further elaborate on the objective reasons which might allow a competent authority to grant the endorsement of third country benchmarks. In this area, it was important to find a good, sensible balance between the need, on the one hand, not to prevent the use of third country benchmarks, and on the other hand, the need to ensure a level playing field. For this reason, we gave prominence to a real objective element, like, for instance, a third country legal framework, as opposed to, say, bilateral contractual agreements. We also considered that a third country benchmark might be substituted by a European benchmark, as well as the provision of that third country benchmarks might be moved into the Union. And in order to take these in consideration at the background, we consider the element of costs, whether costs are reduced if the provision of the benchmark is maintained in a third country region, or whether the costs are going to increase if the provision is instead moved into the Union. Finally, so as to stay in the 10 minutes time, for the transitional provisions, we actually elaborated a non-exhaustive list of conditions on the basis of which a competent authority might permit the continued use of a no-compliant benchmark in case its discontinuation would determine a force majeure event or would otherwise frustrate or breach the legal terms of any contract or financial contract or financial instrument, or the rules of an investment fund. Also in this area was recognized that not all the criteria may be used for every single benchmark to be assessed by a competent authority. And in addition to this, in order to accommodate a clear request by the industry to have legal certainty, the technical advice suggests that if a decision to permit the continued use of a no-compliant benchmark is taken by a competent authority, the decision will have to be published on the competent authority website. So, thank you.